Morning, everyone. All right. So yesterday we have written one web service class, and with that we have understood like how exactly we can write down a web service. Moreover, with the help of Workbench, how we can perform the testing of that. Right now, similar to that, a kind of this. Let's try to create the another one. So it's going to be similar, almost similar. Only the thing would be like instead of fetching the data from the account, I would be fetching it from the case. All right. So a similar kind of web service, like the rest. In the last one, what we have was we get everything, we get all of the records from the account object. Now, in the same way, let me get out the things from the case object. So I would be creating a class called, let's say, case manager services. Let's try to see for the same. So I would be creating a class, close out everything out of this context, and let me now create a new class for this with this name, case manager services. All right. So this is a class wherein I am going to create my whole business logic so that we could fetch it out, fetch the data of the case record. And if someone would ask from, with the use of REST web service, we would be able to send this data, right, to the external world. So to make a class as a REST resource, the first thing what you have to do is you would require to annotate this with a certain keyword called REST resource. Now inside in this bracket, you always have to give a known parameter, which is URL mapping. URL mapping equals to this one, and I should have include whatever the name I wanted to give, and more importantly, you have to give a stick symbol, a star symbol at the end, because yesterday we have seen that what error would occur if you wouldn't have mentioned that star symbol. So you can give any name, you can give any name, and that name is called as resource name. So case manager service, I can give a name like case, let's say service, right? Now, because it's a REST resource, it cannot be, the scope cannot be a public. It always have to be global. The class should always be a global class, right? That's what it is required. Now, inside in this class, I'm going to create a business logic inside a method, and that method would collect everything out of a case object and it's going to return, right? So because it's getting the data, so you have to write down, this method has to be a HTTP GET method, right? Yesterday, even we did the same kind of thing, right? So let me create a class, a method, particularly the method should all, yeah, like your class, the method should be a global method, right? So global static, but not void, because this method would return multiple cases record. I would going to mention the return type as list of case. Now get me all cases. Get me all cases. It will be the name of this method. And here inside in a case, list of case, I would be defining uh, I mean a list collection, and accordingly I'm firing my query. Let's say select ID, then the case number and the status, and let's say the type and the reason. A few more fields could be like origin, priority, and maybe subject. So I would going to fetch this whole thing from the case object. And because we don't have, we are not imposing any condition as of now, we are not fetching anything with a condition. So this is my general query, and this query would going to fetch out everything. Or else, what has been mentioned in this use? Oh, get a new cases only. Yes, yes. So instead of fetching everything out of the object, it should fetch only new cases. I can even change the name of the method. So I can do one thing over here because we just wanted to get the new cases. So I can write down like status should equals to new, right? Status should equals to new. So instead of giving everything out of the object, now this SQL would always, it would going to, it obviously would going to return only those cases where the value of status is new. And if you want, you can even sort it like order by, yesterday we did with the name, but here we don't have name. So I guess we can use case number, right? And now let's return this collection. This whole collection we would be returning. All right. So this actually completes the coding of your web service class. It's pretty simple to write down all these things. Let me now go and test it out. So how you are going to perform that testing? So we are going to again use the workbench. In the first time you always would require to log in because we are using a developer org, not a sandbox. And developer org, by the way, is a production org. So I would make a login with this option only. I'm not going to select the second one, which is sandbox. And now see, because yesterday itself we have authorized the workbench to get connected with this org. And so, today it hasn't prompted, rather it makes a direct login. So what you wanted to do, I wanted to go to the utility tabs and there I wanted to go with the rest. All right. So yesterday I told you like how you can perform the testing. The first thing is like you would have to select the method, the business logic which we have written inside in your API, inside in your web service. That business logic is being written using what kind of method, whether it's a HTTP GET method or an HTTP POST method, put method, bash method or a delete method. Accordingly, you would have to select any one of them. Moreover, there was one more thing which we had a discussion yesterday, like, one web service could only have one HTTP method. Normally, this type of tricky questions, they would ask this in the interview. Can I have multiple HTTP method inside a single web service class? Let's say if there is a class, a web service class, which is having @get, can it also have @post? Or maybe two get statement, two post statement, one of them get, another one would be post, something like that. They will just try to jumble up their words so that they could make you confused about this. But always remember, it's not possible. One web service class could have only one HTTP method. Now, it could have even apart from the HTTP, if you wanted to create a custom method inside in that is of course possible. That is of course possible, but then you cannot have two HTTP classes inside a single web service class. Two HTTP method inside a single web service class. Always remember. Now, let me perform that testing. So we are going to write down something called as Apex REST, again slash Apex REST // and the name which I have given to this web service, the URL name, you would have to put it over here. And once then everything has been set up in a place, you can simply press this execute button. And now, as you can see, it has given us the responses. Every folder itself would represent a single record of that case, right? So you can and if you wanted to see the JSON of that, here it is, what is the JSON looks like to be. All right. So this was again a simple and a straightforward example wherein you can create a web service that would going to return, uh, all records, or a particular record, right? In this example, I just have written everything out of the account object, whereas in the second one, which we just have solved, we particularly would have written all those. I mean, that obviously depends on the query, what type of SQL query you are forming based on that. Because in this SQL, if you would see, I haven't introduced where clause. So there was no filtration at all, right? It would have written everything out of the object. But then with the second one, because we have one where clause and we are particularly projecting to only those case where the status equals to new. So it would have written only those, a kind of thing. Now there are a few of simple examples which you have to take this in the assignments to write a web service which would return you all of the hiring manager records and all of the reads record. But in this, there's a condition that the annual revenue should be more than this particular value. And the status, for this one, you have to get the data from the position wherein the status should be in progress and accordingly. So go with all these examples. They are pretty straightforward. If you found any difficulty, you can definitely ping me onto your WhatsApp group. Now, let's come to the second part. I'm gradually introducing new facts to this discussion. Now, see, this was like, you were just requesting something from over here, right? We were just calling that web service. We were just calling the web service. And prior to this, the example which we have taken, we have followed the same pattern over there as well. The equation was same. From your workbench, you were just calling the web service, right? But let's say, instead of, for example, over with this one itself, let's try to understand, let's try to discuss with this one. Now, this web service is returning me all of the records, but the case is, the status of case is this particular, but is new, all right? And we can see there are many records out of that context. Now, let's say, I wanted that the web service should only return me. What I'm going to do, I would supply a case number. Let's say this one, right? I'm going to supply a case number like this. And I wanted that the web service should only return me those records of cases where the number of case number is this one. It's a unique entity, so it's going to be single record. Or I wanted, like, instead of returning everything, I would ask the user, or let's say we have an interface, for example. Let's say we have a front end. Maybe that has been created with the Visual Force page or maybe a Lightning page, right? And then you are asking the user about few of the entities. Like you are asking about the user, enter status, right? And then maybe you're asking type, or maybe you're asking, let's say, priority. You have these three fields, and accordingly, your user are entering the values. Your users are entering the values inside in three checkboxes, or maybe you have pick list menus for that. They are making their own selections. Now, whatever user has entered, let's say the status he has entered new or old, escalated, whatever, and then type, right? And then the value, priority, whatever. So we wanted to collect this information. And then we wanted to call the web service class. Now, what should happen in this case is, like, if we have our web service over here at this point, we have our web service over here. So what I wanted is, like, that web service should not return me everything. Rather, I wanted that my web service should, we are going to supply these three parameters. Let's say, status value, type value, and priority value. Accordingly, what I wanted is, like, the web service class should return me only those records which would match to this condition. And this is very obviously, in general, this is what we expect. You tell me one thing, you might have seen a lot many user experiences, a lot many user interfaces. Let's say, let me try to give some realistic examples for this one. So, if you would have seen, let's say, a simple thing, if you are performing a reservations of trains, of flights, right? or maybe a hotel booking if you wanted. So what, the usual interfaces which we have seen with the applications like Make My Trip or maybe IRCTC or something else. So they would ask you, like, let's suppose if you are booking a flight for you. So what you usually, how you proceed with that? How you usually perform this action with the user interface? You would, someone mic is on.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, your recording is not on. Might be.
No, I can see that symbol. It's getting recorded.
Okay, sir.
Why do you feel like that?
Sorry.
No, recording is on. Don't worry. Don't worry. Yeah. So you would have seen, like, let me try to give, I'm talking a lot about this, and I can show you. Let's say we have this interface, right? There's an application called Make My Trip, wherein you can perform a lot many activities, all right? And they are right now they are offering 30% off on the international holidays. That's a good thing. So let's say I wanted to book a flight for me. So they are asking to enter me, like, I mean, it's going to be, you wanted this a one-way flight, or maybe a round trip. You accordingly would require to, first of all, there are multiple radio buttons over here. You have to make once first, you obviously would require to make a selection from here. And let's say you wanted to enter the from and the to, and then date and everything. So once you would press this search button, it would going to collect every entity out of here, that it's a one-way flight. This is from, this is the city where the journey is going to be started, and this is that where this place is where he wanted to go, the dates and everything, what the class has he selected, business class or maybe economic class, something like that. And accordingly, or maybe if there is any sort of exception to this, so this have, this, if you would have observed this interface, this user experience have multiple options inside, right? And whenever if you are initiating any search, you can assume internally it would going to fire a query. This application internally would lead to fire a query inside. That's a backend of this. But we can now assume, whenever this query has been formed, is going to be formed internally, there are multiple parameters, and everything out of this is dynamic entity. It's actually not returning me the complete data of lights, you know, flying around the world. No, it would obviously going to give me the details of whatever I have been selected, whatever my selection, the type of info. But otherwise, if it would return me everything, like we just have did with these two examples, it would return you all of the case record. Let's say it would return you all of the account record. And let's say with this application, it would return me thousands of the flight data, which is roaming from one city to another city, one country to another city across the world. That information is of no use. That's obviously a redundant information. I don't want it to get the complete set of that thousands of the records. I precisely wanted what is going to be the use of that type of information. You can assume I wanted that I should get the information for which I am more interested. So we must have seen a lot many user interfaces like this, wherein we supply what we wanted, is supplied dynamically during runtime only. So after collecting this whole information, it would going to return me, it would make all those integrations, make my trip completely do this. It's a completely integrated application, it do everything. And see, these are something called as artificially intelligent. It would give you the statistics that the prices could probably up into this month, and it could probably drop out that month, right? So it give you those statistics as well. This is a highly intelligent application. So it has given me the result precise to what I wanted, right? Instead of returning everything out of the context, it had made those price decisions, right? So how come this is happening at all? So we can literally, we can literally have a small glimpse of all those things, like how actually we could put up the conditions, and then we could ask, let's say we have a static database of this, and Instead of, getting everything out of the object, we particularly wanted to get the data uh, uh, from the parameters which we have supplied as an input. In this case, what I can tell you would be like, you have entered the dates, what type of travel it is, could be a type field, from and to fields, and then your date of departure, right? Return would be null in this case because you haven't selected two-way, a round trip, rather a single trip you have selected. So it's the value is automatically becoming null. See, and then how many passengers wanted, how many tickets you wanted, what type of class you wanted. So everything out of this, what you see over here, that all becomes, that these all become the parameter for that particular query. This becomes the parameter, and accordingly, this result has been displayed, right? So whenever a web service class would have to receive, whenever the web service class would have to receive the parameters, and accordingly it would have to extend the discussion, right? So in that case what we have to do, how we are going to design that, that's a little bit different over here. So let's try to understand, and please solve all these examples, right? So let's extend the discussion and let's understand one more standard class over here, a class called as REST context class. When we say context, what does it means? In a normal terms, context means a data of interest, a data of interest. Let's say if I am talking a lot many things to you, you can say like this person is a very talkative person. Whenever I meet him, he talks a lot and he talks about a lot many things. And there is a very small context which I found intelligent. There's a very small context which I found interesting. Now, this was just an example. This was just an example that the context means a particular piece of information, a particular piece of information which seems to be more advanced, which seems to be more informative, which seems to be out of within interest, not out of interest, which seems to be within interest of someone. So that is what does it means by context. So these parameters which we are going to supply, for example, what is the context information? Whatever the information you just have seen, all these information I can say is the context. Is the context a piece of information that actually serves something good to somebody, right? So that is what is the context. And rest context means everything related to rest. We are doing this whole integration by using a technology called REST. We are not using SOAP, representational state transfer protocol. That is what we are using, right? So that is what is the name of this class indicate. So by the use of REST context class, what you can do is like, you can, what to say and how to explain. We can establish that mechanism of transferring the parameters. We can establish, we can build up a mechanism by which from the external world, maybe like this workbench, I could supply a certain parameters. Wherein and this web service would catch those parameters, and accordingly, based on what you have supplied, it would going to form the responses that is going to be written back to the web service, right? Back from the web service. So that is what it has been mentioned inside in the REST context. And see, if you would observe one thing, if you would sit and think a little bit onto what we are learning. I have told this a lot many times during our discussion. I've told this a lot many times. Apex, whatever you would be going to learn, out of that whole portion, at least 80% of the things would be something that already is there. You just would have to understand how I can use that ready-made class. And you merely don't require to create your own logic. And that is what something, we used to do this in Java. I have studied Java. I mean, I started my IT learning from Java itself. But it was very difficult to code because, every logic, every custom logic, whatever it is, you actually would require to, there were, I mean, later on, people have started adding, what to say, the standard libraries into Java because Sun Microsystem kept it as open source. They themselves would realize that they cannot make it, uh, they cannot make it a closed-ended product. So maybe now people have added a lot many things into that, but in the initial days when I'm talking about somewhere around 15 to 20 years back. So it was very hard to develop something because everything, if you wanted a functionality, you actually would require to create it. So there were, I mean, a few of the standard functionalities, and rather every custom entity, every custom functionality you would have to create. But nowadays it's not like that. Scenario has been changed, and all of these languages, what you are seeing right now in Node and React and Angular, they are built up on the top of standard libraries, and those standard libraries internally they are even created on Java. You won't believe Apex itself is created on Java. Apex itself is created on Java. Your Lightning Web Component internally, they are using JavaScript mechanisms, right? So yes, Java is everywhere. Java is everywhere. But why? Because Java is an open source kind of thing, you know. So a lot many people have worked and it have developed a lot many custom logics. But चलो ठीक है हम उस level पे नहीं जाते हैं because whatever we are creating is the top of that, right? So everything whatever we are creating is top of that. So basically we just have to worry about those things. We just would have to learn about all those standard classes and everything. All right. So there is a class, there is a standard class as REST context class, which would help you out to build up that mechanism of communication between your provider and consumer. I can say between your web service external world and the receiver web service class, right? And just go with this. It internally have a REST request and REST response as a classes. Like you remember in the HTTP class, there was again two. HTTP was the parent class, and there were two subclasses. There were two child classes: HTTP request and HTTP response. Right? In the same way, REST context is the parent class, and then we have REST request and REST response as the child classes. All right, so we're going to see them, what type of methods have been used, right? What type of methods and everything. I'm going to have a discussion about this. Like there's a method called as request and then params and everything. So we're going to talk this in with this example. So let's go with this. There is like, create a web service to get the required lead information. Not everything, not everything. So required information based on the lead ID given as an input parameter. So if inside in your request, if someone is requesting from the external world, what he's requesting, he wanted to get the data of a lead record, but then he don't wanted everything out of that lead. Rather, he would supply an ID. He would supply an ID. He would, when the request he would send from the external world, he along with his request is going to include the lead ID, and that lead ID will have to capture and accordingly we would have to return the result back to them, right? So now in this case, you have a particular thing. You have to extend the search on a particular entity. All right. So let me create a class called as a lead manager class. So I'll go. I would create a new class called as lead manager class. And now let me make this class as a web service. To make it as a web service API, I would have to annotate this with a defined keyword called REST resource. Now this REST resource always have a known parameter called as URL mapping equals to single inverted comma, 2 slashes, asterisk at the end. Now give any nickname to this. Let's say a lead manager service, lead record services. You can give any name. Just try not to give the same name as your class name because we obviously wanted to hide this name from inside in the URL, and that's the reason, right? The scope should be global. That's why you can see this error around over here. Now I'll go inside and I'll build up that logic by using a get method. So it would be HTTP get. And again, global static, but a method that would lead. And see, I mean, in this case, what's going to be happen would be like, based on a lead ID, the ID is going to be the input parameter. Now we know this one thing. We know one thing, that IDs are unique in Salesforce, isn't it? It's not going to be possible that there would be two records or multiple records with the same ID. Why should I define the return type as, the list of lead? Why should I define? You can assume, even though if I would define, that's not an issue. I'm asking you to think of this. When you are supplying an ID, the IDs are unique. So there are always going to be a single record against that ID, or maybe there would be no record. But if there is a record, if the ID is matching, if ID is having the matching record, it's always going to be a single record, isn't it? That's a primary key. So if this method would return only a single record of lead, why should I define list of lead as a return type? Don't you think it's going to be a very foolish kind of thing? A very stupid kind of thing, isn't it? That's why, because it's going to return me a single record, that's why I'm just defining lead, single record, a lead as a return type. Give the name to the method. So get lead record. We usually follow a pattern that first letter is always small. Get lead record, let's say by ID is the name of the method. It's the name of the method. And now let me try to save up to this. I wanted this error to get gone. Um, hmm, hmm. Yeah, it is asking for a return. Yeah, because we have given a return, so it's asking for a return. If you would see that, it would asking for a return, missing return state. Yes, of course, no problem. Anyways, so let me now fire a query. But before that, and we would assume, see over here, you before designing that, you would have to make an assumption that if this is your front end, or wherever wherever you are requesting, this, you have to supply an ID. You have to supply an ID. So we would make this assumption that a lead ID is coming as an input. Let's say if there is a user interface like this, and somebody is typing something from over here, 00Q 1234, whatever, then this is a lead ID. And let's say from a front end, this lead ID is coming. Now, how you are going to capture that? Let's understand. So the first thing is to capture the input. The first thing is to capture the input. So in this, I'm going to make a use of, I would be making a use of REST request. I'm going to make the use of REST request class. Now, REST request is a child class to REST context. And here in this, REST request class, there is a method called as params. Right? So this is how, like, you have to design the mechanism. This is that mechanism. You first of all I have to ask for the REST context. Now, REST context is what? The REST context is your base class. And then after that, you have to add a parameter called request. Which belongs to this class, REST request. And then a method called as params. REST context dot request dot params. So this would give you, this would return whatever the parameter is coming from the external. Now, this would always return a map collection. The return type of this is always a map collection. You're going to see that. A map of string, comma, string, by the way. A map of string, comma, string. All right. Let's see how we can write down. So inside in my class, I would first of all would write down REST context dot C. There are these three things. REST context is the name of the class. It have either a clone method, request, or response. I'll go with request. Request dot request dot you have all this. You have all this. Parents is not come. Anyways, I'll use this. I'm not sure why it's not coming, but params is something. Now, see this, when you are requesting REST context dot request dot params, so what it would give? It would give that parameter. It would build up a mechanism that would supply the parameter which is coming from the external world. Now, this has to be collected. This always has to be collected inside a map collection. This always have to be collected inside a map collection. And that map is always going to be a map of string comma string. That means both of the parameters would be a string. Let's give a name to that. Let me give a name as input parameter. Whatever the input parameter has been given, that is going to be get collected over here, right? Now, see, this is a map collection. So when you are filing a query, you have to use the methods accordingly like this, right? We'll see. So first of all, understand this statement. I'll repeat it once again. So see, I wanted to fire a query because I wanted to collect the information of lead record. So obviously in my SQL query, I'm going to design a query on the lead object. But did I wanted to return everything? No. What I wanted in particular, I wanted just to return that lead record which matches to the lead ID. Okay. So I should return a precisely only one record. Fine. Now, from where you are getting that lead ID, that is coming from the outer world. That is coming from the external system. Maybe there is a front end from where there is a checkbox, there is a text box, and we have write down that lead ID to perform the search. And now someone is entering that. Let's assume that. So whatever the parameter is coming from the external world, we just would require to collect it, and we would have to return only that lead record which matches to that ID. So how you are going to collect that parameter? So for that, there is a built mechanism. There is an inbuilt mechanism. You first of all would require to call the REST context class, then request, and then params. Now, param method would always return a map collection. So I have collected it inside a map. And that map would be a map of string, comma string. Key and value both are going to be string. All right. Let's understand. Let's go further with this. Now, as a second step, I'm going to design my query, which would return me only a single record of it. So I'm not going to form a list collection. Rather, once again, I am just creating a lead variable, lead record. Let's say to return, right? You can give any name, no problem. Now design that SQL query. Select ID, and then let's say first name, last name, email, company, phone, or title, fax, whatever you want. You can return a lot many things like fax, rating, industry value, annual, annual revenue value. I guess this much is sufficient. From lead, like, but do I wanted to return everything? Do I wanted to return all of the records inside lead object? No, no, no. We have a certain condition where what is coming from, what is coming dynamically, id is coming, so where id equals to colon equals to colon is dynamic assignment, we know this, right? Equals to colon means that parameter is coming dynamically. And now because we have collected this inside input parameters, but see, map collection have two things, right? Key and value. Key and value. I just wanted to get what key. So get any key. See, get is the method, right? Get is the method. So I wanted to get what? I just wanted to get the ID. That's what. I just wanted to get the ID, information of ID. I hope this is good. Yeah. And now same thing. Yeah. All right. So where the input parameters like this, which I have collected, out of this, I just wanted to get the ID. So when the ID would match to give me that record of lead where this ID matches to this ID, right? And once we get this, we just have to return that. So return, we have stored this inside in this. So I would return it. That's it. Now let me save it. Okay. So this has been done. The backend has been done. Now let's understand how you are going to request this from the front end. How you are going to request. I will just refresh this out once again. Let me refresh this window. And here I would delete this case service. I would rather give the name lead record services. Lead. And now see, if you would see, if you would try to execute this, it would going to throw certain errors, right? It would list has no rows. It has not fetched anything. It has not fetched. Your query has not been executed. So there is no rows for the assign. No row means you don't have anything to display. Why? Because ideally this request, which is coming from the front end, let's say this is your front end, it should come up with an ID, an ID. It should come up with an ID. All right. So let's understand how we can transfer that parameter. So you have to extend little more things over here. First, put up a slash, then this question mark sign. And because we are supplying ID, right? One thing I would have to mention. The way it has been written over here, it should match this symbol. This symbol should match. If instead of this, if I would supply, I would try to supply it like this. I mean, I just have changed the case, so I'm sure it would going to give me the error. So this has to match. One second, I'll just, let me get any lead record ID as well. So I can Christian. What is the lead ID? This one. This you can do directly. See, here, as you can see, this, the ID, the way it has been written over here and the way I have written inside in the class, they are not matching. So I'm sure this would give me certain errors. Yes, right? So again, your query has not written anything. Why it is happening? Basically, like here you have written ID equals to what? So this has to match what you have supplied over here. So this has to be matched, right? Let's now try to once again execute this. Now, once again, I would execute this. This time it would going to be executed. See. So, whatever, let's say if this is a name, so the string, whatever has been written, the string what has written over here, that should have an exact match to what we are writing as in parameter. If you even try a single case, you make a small case to capital or capital to lower, upper to lower, lower to whatever. So it's going to throw you the error. This has to be have an exact match. All right. So this is how like you can supply the parameters as well. Now, go with this example. Create a web service to fetch the record based on a specific priority at runtime. So that priority as would going to be given as an input, right? That priority is going to be given as an input. The code has been written. Try with this one, and there are a few assignments. Now, next session, I'm going to start with HTTP delete. So this was all of the example about get method. This every example, there are a lot of them, right? It's almost like I have solved 3 of them. 5 is an assignment, so 5 plus 3 is 8. And then again you have 8 plus 4. So it's almost 12 examples are there. That is really enough to understand. I guess 2 or 3 example is more than to understand a concept. There are 12 of them. So definitely you can have an understanding, right? So in the next session, I'm going to start with the second form of the HTTP method, which is actually a delete one. That's all for today. If you have any question, please go ahead and ask. Yes, any questions? Any questions around this or anything else? Any questions? Thank you so much for joining.